All right, thanks so much, Mike, for taking the time to sit down and have a conversation. I'm really excited about this episode because I know you have done so many things in your life and you have so much wisdom and so much that you could share to my audience and people listening that want to go out and be an entrepreneur. They want to do things and really make a difference. So before getting started, if you want, just, give a little introduction of yourself to everybody listening.
I'm not sure I have a lot of wisdom, but I do have experience.
You have a lot of wisdom.
A lot of experience. So I was born here in L.A., grew up through high school here in L.A., went to a Jesuit high school, went back east to college, came back, did a few things like writing a children's book, and then got into real estate. Now I own a real estate company.
And you've been in real estate for a little while now, right?
45 years. It's a real estate brokerage. We now have 300 agents that work for us. And we've been involved in some development in the past, but mostly it's brokerage. We negotiate deals between buyers like yourself and sellers like your girlfriend.
I know, because she wants me to move back to LA. So you're going to have to find me a beautiful piece of property that we can move into with a huge yard because I have the dogs that need to run around.
Yeah, 100 acres for that.
And horses.
Oh my gosh.
And you're and you're going to be getting another dog eventually as well. So, that way I have a yard to watch your dog when you need somebody to babysit your dog for you.
I would love to get another dog. You're right about that.
Heck yeah.
Thank you very much.
Another lab, right? Labs are amazing dogs.
It was a lab. It was a lab mix.
Oh, was it a lab mix?
Yeah, Pumbaa was a lab mix for sure.
He was a rescue though, right?
He was a rescue. My neighbor found him by the Coliseum.
Yep.
Good dog.
He was a really sweet dog. So before we start talking about the real estate, because I do want to talk about that, but you've done some amazing things. You told me in stories before while we were hanging out, having a couple cocktails, and the one that really fascinated me was the involvement that you had during the time of Martin Luther King. So you were out there and you did a lot of things to contribute and help out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Wow. That's a long time ago. Funny you ask, because I just watched Ken Burns' great documentary on the Vietnam War. And it covers the period from our involvement there until the end in the mid-'70s. But during that period, coinciding with it was the civil rights movement of the mid-'60s. And so I was in college. It would have been 1965, and some buddies, friends of mine and I from college, went down to Selma because that was what the center of activity was. And we're hanging out it was the AME Zion Church, heard Martin Luther King speak, because this is 65, before he was shot, and a number of civil rights leaders. And we were all considered to be communists, or nefarious people who were acting, against the best interests of our government. So it was a little bit tight, to say the least, a little bit dangerous. There were some kids who were killed there. There were some people killed on the bridge that we marched on a few weeks earlier. But I was not involved in that particular day. But, it was a very active time in particularly for college kids and the civil rights movement and the people who were in the South. But during that time, I believe Lyndon Johnson, our president, gave a speech and got Congress to pass the 1965 Civil Rights Act. So it was an important period in our life. In our country's life, that is.
Yeah, and so those that...
I was thrown in jail. That was probably the thing you wanted me to talk about.
Yeah, I want to hear all that stuff. And I know my audience, or our audience rather, would like to hear all of it as well. It's fascinating because not that many people know somebody who was part of that movement and helped support Martin Luther King.
Well, I was very minor. Nothing really happened to me except the time we were exiting Selma down what I thought was an unknown road, which was a mistake. We were traveling down it, stopped by a police car that took us to some remote town, threw me in jail for some remote reason. And
what was the reason
for speeding? But I've never been thrown in jail for speeding, but they did. I think that there were some, white boys, meaning good old boys, who were in the cell with me. There was a big cell of 7 guys that didn't appreciate college kids like me coming from the north. So we got a few scuffles. I did not want to spend the night in jail that night. So
how'd you do in the scuffles?
How'd I do?
Yeah, did you hold your ground pretty well?
As best as I could, yeah. I was not like you. I was not born to be a fighter.
Hey, I get my butt kicked all the time. And then, there's a lot of other cool stories that you told me before. You grew up in LA, so you've been out here the entire time, and you've been pretty successful. And I know at some point you had a beautiful piece of property out here, and a lot of celebrities would even come down and hang out with you, right?
Well, I don't know if it was beautiful or not. I had a big view, and at the time there were some actors that hadn't quite made it yet, and they came to hang out because they had a pool and a view. I shouldn't mention their names only because I don't think they'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really awesome when you were telling me that story. I couldn't believe it that you had all these different people coming constantly to your house, hanging out with you, and so you know a lot of people within the industry that people are so fascinated about. The industry of Hollywood, the movie industry.
Maybe at the time this would have been in the '70s, early '80s, perhaps. And, but I'm not in any way part of Hollywood anymore, so I can't be blamed for what's going on.
Right.
in that regard, I'm not part of that crowd.
After the events that took place with the civil rights movement, and you continued on within your education, you ended up graduating, and at what point did you move towards your career path of owning this really successful company that is involved in real estate? How did you get to that point? What obstacles did you have to overcome? What challenges did you face on a regular basis? And were there times where you wanted to quit or you wanted to give up because it was way more of a challenge than maybe you thought it was?
It's always the challenges that you learn by, right?
Absolutely.
You know that. Well, the challenges for being an entrepreneur, number one, is to be fearless and to take risk, knowing full well you may not succeed. Even today, I own a company, and real estate has a way of, like all markets, going through a lot of volatility. The ups and downs and the crests of the market, whether it's the real estate market or the equities market, the bond market. And one has to be prepared to sustain that. And when you're young, you don't necessarily have the wherewithal to do that. So you have to take not only a risk, but search out good support mechanisms, whether it's banking relationships, investors, or whatever, which is what we did way back in the day.
And I know you have a business partner with your company. Did you start at the very beginning with him, like you guys started together?
No, I brought him in to help expand the first company I founded. He was very confident that he would do that, and I was too, but it didn't work out because my partners at the time didn't have the same vision that he and I did. So we broke off of the old company and started a new company, and this is about 13, 14 years ago. And now, as he said, it has 300 agents who work for us and a staff of probably 35, 40.
Which is amazing.
Well, it's small. It's still small, given the broader.
Well, you're also very humble.
Still a small company, yeah.
Well, how did you get to that point? So when you decided that or what made you decide to get into real estate? How did that become something that you wanted to embark on?
Well, that's a good question. I went to, when I went to grad school, I took a degree in urban planning and city planning and urban studies. So I became very involved in the sphere of land use, the valuation of real estate, how important it was to the viability of our cities and our communities. And I was just intrigued with that. So I had founded, when I was at the university, I went to a nonprofit housing corporation that, and this is for part of my thesis, went out and we started building or renovating housing in New Haven, Connecticut, using funds from the university, or the backing of the university helped. I went to a bank and got a loan. I don't know how I did this. And we had some Ford Foundation money. So we started renovating, housing for middle-income, low-income families, and we supported them by putting students in that housing situation to, support the rents. Well, it's kind of an innovative idea. I think we had some success doing that. Anyway, that was the beginning of my real estate.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, it went from nonprofit to my thinking, well, there must be a way of doing this for profit.
Well, what I was about to say, too, is didn't that lead into, you had some involvement in the development of Section 8 housing to be able to get...
Yes, it was, well, I don't know if Section 8 housing was actually called Section 8 housing. I think it was a section of law called 221D3, and I think that was the program we actually utilized. But it's like Section 8 housing.
And how did you end up helping with the development of that, or how were you involved with that?
Well, we provided, the physical shelter and the money to either renovate or construct, that shelter. And then by getting the subsidies available to us to make that physical, improvement, we had to pay it back, obviously, and we did that by getting students to rent, which were pretty much unsupported. They didn't need the support of rent subsidies. But the community people who rented in the same complex, they did. So that's how it worked. I believe in one or two cases we rented to the house. This happened to be in New Haven, Connecticut. The New Haven Housing Authority. So it's kind of complicated. That's the way it worked out.
The first real estate company you started, you had different business partners that you started with from the current one, and you guys just had different visions. Did they go on to create their own real estate company as well?
They continued in their own direction as well.
If somebody has a different vision, there's nothing wrong with being able to separate and do something else with whatever is making you happy. And I actually like that you said that too, because there's a lot of times I think where people get stuck doing something for an extended period of time, and it may be good at the very beginning when they start off, like a job or relationship or whatever the case may be, and then they stick with it because they're afraid of changing, or they're thinking, oh, I'm getting too old, I can't do something different, I might as well stick with this. And I think it's good for people if they're in a position where they're no longer going in the direction that they want, whether it's with a company that they've started or, as I said before, different situations, to be able to let go and move on to something else, even if you have to, in a sense, start all over and rebuild and do it again. I mean, I love doing that, though. I love starting something new and building it and seeing it grow. I mean, I think it's amazing. But again, I think I've seen a lot of people that get stuck like that. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
How can somebody
You're not one of them, I would say that.
How can somebody get past that? Or how can, I really want to talk about some of the hurdles, because nobody builds a really successful company without hitting hurdles. And I want people who are out there who want to be, an entrepreneur and want to start their own company to understand that and know what some of the challenges that they might face, and like some of the things that might be really important for them when they're starting out, such as finding a good team to start with.
Well, you just hit on the right thing. Finding, if you're in business, the right partner. In this case, I found a great partner, who was excellent in marketing and advertising, and also very good at organizational management principles, where I was weak, and that helped. I think gaining confidence for the for the core team, the people that we had coming with us, had full of that confidence and full of that encouragement. And so that's the first step, number one, confidence. And as I said, that confidence helps to overcome fear. And fear is, as you know, is probably the demon of all progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a book I read a few years back was called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. And I think I even told you the story. I was reading with Mauricio, reading different books, and I worked with him at the time, so we would talk about the different books that we were reading. And one day, him and I went out paddle boarding. And as you know,
in Santa Monica?
Yep. And as you know, I'm afraid of sharks. They absolutely terrify me. And we're in the
marina?
In the marina, yeah. And so usually there's not that many sharks in the marina, but nonetheless, it still freaks me out if it's water where a shark can gain access to. And he's probably around 50 feet away from me, give or take, and he's on a thinner, faster style board, and mine's one of the little bigger kind of amateur type boards where you're not going to fall off that easy. And he says, hey, why don't we switch paddle boards? I want to try that one out for a little bit. You can try this one. I said, yeah, no problem. How about you paddle over here and we'll switch? And he said, no. How about we jump in where we are now and we'll swim to each other's paddle boards? And I said, you lost your mind. There's no way I'm doing that. And he said, feel the fear and do it anyways.
And
I said, it's like, you got me. You know what I mean? You got me. What am I going to say to that? So I jumped in, and I was a Marine combat instructor of water survival. I'm a strong swimmer. The moment I jumped in that water, though, it was instant panic. My adrenaline shot through the roof, and I swam as fast as I could to get to that other paddleboard. And not even being that long of a swim, by the time I got to his paddleboard, from the absolute panic, just thinking a shark's going to swim up and bite me in half, I could barely even breathe. I got to the other side, but I did it. But yeah, I think that's really important. Anytime you feel something where you're nervous about it or you're fearful, just go in and do it. Some things that, I gave a speech for, which you're aware of, for Veterans Day this year, and I was super nervous, and I care a lot about the military because I've seen it. I've been out in combat. I've done those things. and I was emotional giving the speech. I was nervous as hell. I was emotional. There was a man who was given a award before I went up to speak because his son went through that school where I was the guest speaker, and his son died in combat. So they were giving him the award, and he gave an emotional speech. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. How am I gonna? I went up there, but people like that too. People like the authenticity. Of somebody.
For sure.
And
see, your stories are a lot more interesting than mine.
now you have,
But I'm going to tell you something right now. In the marina,
yes,
it's packed with sand sharks. They're about maybe 2.5 feet. You didn't see any that time?
I did see some of those. Yeah, I did.
But you know what? Their teeth are like, they're not even as long as pinpricks.
Yeah.
Or pin. So they can really, they don't think they hurt you. But there are a lot of them that, for some reason, they hang out there in the marina.
Yeah, you see them when you first get on the paddleboard, but like you said, they're tiny. I was talking to this, I don't remember where it was. I think it was actually at an event that we were at, Pitties in the Park.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we were there, and somehow somebody said something about sharks, and I said, yeah, I don't swim in the water. And she says, yeah, sharks aren't that bad, but this kid was just attacked by a shark the other day. And I said, yeah, you're really selling the idea of me jumping in the water when you're mentioning a kid that was just attacked. I think it was a tiger shark. He was diving by himself
Diving in the... Yeah, well, they're pretty vicious, those tiger sharks.
Yeah, I don't want to mess with those. Bill Burr has a great bit on that. I'm not going to ruin the bit by attempting to say it, but it's pretty funny. People need to look it up. Anyways, so...
Do it anyway.
Let's do the bit?
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do that. Okay. If you don't mind talking about, are there any things that you could think of where you actually really struggled when you were setting up your business at the very beginning? Or was it like smooth sailing the whole way? You didn't hit a single storm?
Well, there are always storms. I think, I don't remember, though, let me just think, the biggest hurdle. Well, when we first began the concept of selling what we considered, my first partner and I, Crosby Doe, architectural real estate, which was promoting the historically important properties in Southern California because of their architect and architectural heritage. Homes designed by Hamilton Harwell Harris, the guy who designed this house that we're in right now, or Richard Neutra, Rudolph Schindler, and Raphael Soriano. No one really understood what we're talking about. But these were masterpieces, and they were so much a part of our cultural history. It was amazing to me that no one really believed that these have value. So I think the most important hurdle we had was convincing people that not only did these have value, but there was a niche in the marketplace that wanted these kinds of properties that we wanted to sell to those kinds of buyers. Now you hear mid-century modern, and everybody uses it to provide everything built from 1941 to 91. It's like an accepted value. But I think dealing with preconceptions and dealing with cultural norms, to me, was a big challenge. Just as it was in the very first story we talked about when it came to civil rights and dealing with preconceptions and cultural norms that are very different from what you would expect is the biggest hurdle I've probably experienced, whether it was the political arena or in the business arena over the last, 45 years. And that's why I think you and I have very different backgrounds when it comes to the military. And very shortly after the civil rights movement we were talking about earlier in the mid-'60s, we got to a point in the late 60s where that kind of translated into the anti-war movement, which became very connected to the civil rights movement as well, for reasons we don't need to get into, but historically it was. And once again, it was a matter of transforming the cultural values of the time, which were very much in favor of the war, very much in favor of the government being in the right, even though the government thought that anybody who was marching against the war was probably influenced by Hanoi or Red China, which is not the case. I never had any contact with any of those people. But I was always very jealous, though, of my brothers who went into the military, because I was 4F, because I was blind in one eye. And so I didn't really have to fight the issue of going or not going. So, but I felt I should put myself on the line. And that's why, actually, going back to the incident that we can't talk about, I did what I did, and became an object of vilification, and pursuit by the FBI and people like that, because I was, a communist sympathizer and all the stuff that by the end of the 60s, the attitudes in this country have changed. But I will say this, which is very relevant for today, where we are living in a very fractious community as a whole, the entire nation, and everybody thinks that we're going through a tremendous, upswelling of infighting and the lack of truth and and maybe even violence. The late 60s and maybe early 70s were a lot more violent. And as a country, we've gone through this before. So I'm confident that we will get through this period once again. That's what I have to say about that. And yet when you're 17, you can
sign up. Yeah, you can sign up.
How old were you?
I was 17 when I signed. We'll talk about what we can. For example, when all the different businesses that I've started, I've ran into issues. For example, of how do I learn properly how to market? How can I use certain things to leverage and build my company up? Even something as simple as dealing with taxes the first time you start a business. Everything is new, and sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. Did you run into anything like that in the very beginning when you're starting out, where you're like, oh my gosh, how do I get this logo made? Or how do I get my website built up? How do I start getting my clients? How do I start letting people know that I'm an expert within this field and they can trust me with their
All of those
needs?
are good questions. No, absolutely. And that's the beginning of starting any kind of company. We made use of extremely good graphics and artistry. At the time, way back in the 70s, believe it or not, of course you didn't have anything online at the time at all. It was all through print media. But there wasn't any emphasis on photography. And so there were two things that impressed me at the time about real estate. The contracts were probably a half a page in length. Now, the contract is 8 to 10 pages, depending upon how you measure the addenda, with about 5 attachments. And so it's gotten from a half a page with no contingencies to all kinds of contingencies protecting the buyer. The caveat emptor is taken to extreme, and buyers are protected. So, where am I going with that? It was a lot easier at the time to construct deals, because not that we would take advantage of a buyer, but we didn't have to go through all the hoops that the real estate industry has to go through now to create and negotiate a contract. But going back to branding, at the same time, there was no such thing as a database that accumulated all the listings of possible options that were available for buyers. You had to go through a broker. Today, you just simply go online and you get it through Zillow. That's a big change. At the time, in the late 70s, we had to create, the mid-70s actually, the imagery. We did that by using extremely good photography and placing it on a quality paper and distributing that to not only clients but also to other brokers. Now, you may think that this is very standard, but it was not standard at the time, and that's what it did.
And how did it, speaking of technology, as the technology started to change and started to improve and get better, and new things like Zillow was added to the equation, how did you have to adjust fire in order to maintain the position and to continue to grow and not fail because of not adjusting to that technology?
In my business, the industry felt, we're talking about the brokerage industry, that agents with the S apostrophe, their primary job was to uncover what was available to buyers and sellers. We realize today that's not the case, because buyers can go on any number of online platforms and find out what's available. And what's become more important for our industry and for the agent is to understand that their primary role is to negotiate, and secondly, to shepherd the client and the buyer, in this case, or in this example, through a transaction that's extremely complicated. And the same thing holds for a seller. So the buyer or seller can choose to go through an attorney who may or may not understand all the intricacies of that particular problem, or they can go through an agent. My feeling is that the actual presence of a shepherd in this case is vitally important, especially here in Los Angeles, where the contracts and the available inventory is extremely complicated and rife with all kinds of difficulties. Hillside properties and construction defect property the problems and all that stuff.
And the contracts that you were saying earlier too, as they started to become larger, is that maybe a byproduct of? Let me see, best way to put this. Is that
Litigation?
maybe that's a byproduct of trial and error in a sense. For example, with Facebook, when they first started out, they had about maybe a dozen people that would regulate posts that were put on Facebook to determine whether or not they should be removed. A human has to look at every single post. Now, of course, that has grown from 12 people to 12,000 or something like that. The number is incredible. As Facebook continued to grow and more people were posting on Facebook and using it as that social platform and social media, they had to continuously adjust the rules for what could be placed on Facebook and what couldn't. For example, for the longest time, it was anything that is inside of the body should not be outside of the body. So no gore, violence, anything like that. And then when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, there was a very iconic photo of a man being wheeled off from the scene, and his leg had been blown off, and you could see some of the bone. And somebody posted that, and of course Facebook pulled it off, but then they were starting to think, well, this is a very iconic image. People need to see the violence that could take place, so they're more equipped to deal with it or protect themselves or increase security, whatever the case may be. So certain things as far as politics are now getting involved, and they're constantly having to change according to each situation. For another example, nipples weren't supposed to be shown, and then there was these women that were posting photos of them breastfeeding their infants, and those were pulled off, and there was this huge uproar. Why are you pulling? This isn't pornography. This is a mother feeding its infant. Then they had to change for that, and they said, well, one nipple, right? So point being is it went from being one page of rules to now it's 50 pages, because every time somebody would post a new photo and there was nothing that would cover that particular photo, whether or not it could be on there, they had to change the rules. Do you think it could be? That's a long-winded way of saying, is that maybe some of the reason why it became larger, because certain things would happen?
Well, I think in the case of Facebook, there was some threat maybe of litigation or control or regulation by the government agency, a lot of controversy. And in the case of that particular contract, it was a way of protecting the agent and the buyer and seller. Well, I think Facebook was protecting itself, and to a certain extent, the contract was an attempt, the real estate contract was an attempt to protect the agents and agencies involved in that, but also the buyer and seller from extended litigation that would lead to litigation, which can be very expensive.
Did you run into a lot of issues during the 2008 crash?
The recession? Yeah, that was a difficult time.
But you survived through it. You pushed through it.
It's funny you bring that up, because I guess I tend to forget the hurdles because I tend to repress those kinds of problems.
And think about
I wonder why that is. That's true. I do. Return. I think we got through that recession in 2 or 3 major ways. The first way was that we were going to determine that we were going to get through it, as I think everybody did during the recession. A lot of our clients, though, were developers at the time who were just getting started in the development of multifamily complexes in downtown LA and Hollywood, West Hollywood, and so on. And they were at various stages of development, but because valuations fell, the bank's security in these projects, fell. And so now all of a sudden the loans that the banks had out to these developers, exceeded in some cases by a large amount the valuation of the security. So they stopped lending. So it became our job to go out and help and find, other lenders who would take out the primary lender and get the project going again. But by doing that, we eventually were able to finish the projects, get them sold in 2009, 2010, which provided income during a time when the income was very, very, very narrow. What we were able to devise various structures of pricing that allowed although we never had to use it really, that allowed the developer or the seller to guarantee that if prices fell, there'd be a way of backstopping that for the buyer. So if a buyer, had a lot of buyers had a hesitation to buy during 2009, 2010, because why would they buy something for 500,000 when they were convinced that it would go down to 400,000 in 2 years? Well, we had to make sure we developed. Without getting into it, we tried to devise ways of backstopping that. So if that reduction did happen, the seller would take on some of the responsibility. Now, that never happened. But just the very fact that we gave confidence to the buyer enabled the buyer to go forward. So once again, it's a matter of confidence going forward that makes the deal work.
Confidence, I think a key word to take from that too is trust.
That's
You
right.
know, I was talking to someone the other day because I'm currently in the process of developing dog training videos. And I was talking to a friend of mine about how I was planning on pricing it and how I was planning on selling it and my return policy. And I said, I'm going to give that 30-day money back guarantee. And he said, no, because people are going to download it and then they're going to watch the videos and get their money back. And I said, you know what? Some people will do that, but most people are good people. And if you say, here's a product, but there's no return or refund, then you're losing trust from your customers that you mean to help. So if I have a group of people, I want them to know you have that guaranteed satisfaction. I want to make sure you trust me. I want to make sure that I'm going to do everything I can to deliver a good product and not put my customers or my, what's a better word than customers?
Clientele.
Yeah, clientele. Not putting my customers or clientele in a bad position. I want to make sure that they trust me. So I think confidence, but I think it's more of that trust, being able to trust and know that if something did happen, you would have their back.
Yeah. It's exactly right. And trust is the fundamental to confidence, I think.
And I know everyone on your team has trust for you. And something that I really love about your leadership is you don't try to portray yourself as being some sort of superhero who's perfect and doesn't have any flaws.
Really?
Yeah.
I told you that.
I know. I know you take good care of your team. You host different events for them, right? Like holiday events and things like that.
Right. For the team, but also our clientele. We try to be local and reach out to the local communities that we serve, whether it's the village of Sierra Madre or Venice Beach, all that is very important. And we like doing that. Well, I don't want this to be real estate can be very dry and very boring, I guess, and everybody wants to talk about it. I think that it's my bread and butter, and
People want to learn about it.
I guess they do want to learn about it. For the uninitiated, which are the younger people who are just buying, I got to tell them that don't hesitate to use the assistance of a real estate agent. Not because I am one and because I have agents who work with me, but because it's here in this particular market, it's filled with all kinds of chasms and crevices which can absorb and create failure. And so I think a good agent can help you, the buyer and the seller, get through all that. Financing is difficult. The pricing, again, as we were facing in the recession, we don't have that situation right now. But whenever there is a lull in the market, buyers think, we should wait. Not realize that by waiting, interest rates may go up, and over time, they may get something for a little bit less, but they're going to pay a lot more interest rates, which is what's happening right now, actually.
Oh, this is great then. So advice for possible buyers, right? So first thing is find a good agent.
Correct.
What's a good way for somebody, because anyone in the United States will be able to listen to this. So
You're putting me on the spot.
yeah. So what would be
You make this a sales pitch. And I don't
no, not a sales pitch, but what I was going to ask is something that people often ask me that are in different locations throughout the country. They say, how can I know that the dog trainer that I'm hiring is a qualified good dog trainer?
What do you say?
Well, I explain to them that it's good to look at their background. Do they compete in anything? Do they have any formal education on it? Formal education, if they don't have it, that's not the, end all. If they compete or they do something outside of just training pet dogs, what do they do with their own dogs? You're right, little things like that. So what type of advice would you give somebody that is looking to buy a house, first time home buyer, and they're looking into different agents? What would be a good way for them to find or to be in a position where they're gonna be comfortable and it's gonna be a smooth, easy process for them?
I think, regardless of whether one is a buyer or a seller, there are so many online programs that allow agents to put forth, their recommendations and their blogs, for example, and their referral, capacities. And a lot of it is not necessarily, I don't say it's not necessarily the truth, but it can be manipulated. And the best way I know is to meet in person the 2 or 3 agents that you think, are going to be good at either you finding a house or selling your house. And as you said earlier, trust is the most important thing. So whether you're buying or you're selling a property, for most Americans, that is their most valuable asset. It represents their savings. It represents their shelter. It represents their position within the community. It represents their location within a neighborhood, all of which are very important emotionally, to say the least, as well as financially. So trust is the important thing. Now, more important than even the knowledge, perhaps, that may come forth from an agent is the ability for you to trust in that agent. And a lot of that trust is built on knowledge. What has the agent done, and so on. But at the support to meet person to person. I guess I'm not very virtual that way. I mean, I can't really meet people significantly, with an algorithm.
But they can come into an office, they can meet somebody out, and maybe go around.
Right, eventually. I mean, they can do the research, obviously, online. But I think it's important to actually meet someone first. I mean, eventually.
And if you were to have the opportunity to go back in time and sit down with young Mike Deasy, what advice would you give him?
These questions, you must have just thought about these questions, ages and ages and ages, months and months to make this thing, worth your while. What would I do when I was younger?
Well, what could you tell your younger self? What advice would you give the younger Mike Deasy?
Maybe take more risks.
Take more risks.
Yeah. And again, not necessarily be afraid of the situation that may come about. Because basically, I think I'm a conservative person, and being able to expand one's capacity and one's energy through risk taking, I think it can lead to disaster, but it can also lead to a good deal of success.
When you're in your 20s, you didn't take as many risks?
In my 20s. Went back to my 20s. Yeah, I took too many risks.
Too many risks in your 20s?
Well, that goes back to the 60s and 70s. So.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying.
My parents didn't know what I was doing then. They would disown me. Are you kidding me?
Well, before starting your business, right? Like if you had an opportunity right before you start your business to say, maybe you should do this, it'll make this process smoother, or fill in the blank.
I could have made a lot more money had I gone right into industrial or commercial real estate that I was offered to do in my late 20s. But I chose to, as I said, found this nonprofit corporation. I then worked for the state of Connecticut, working out an economic and environmental plan for the shoreline of Connecticut, a certain part of it, which to me was very interesting. It was dynamic, and it included not only environmental protection, but also economic opportunity protection, which I thought was very, all of that was integrated into the same plan. That too was exciting, so I did that. Didn't make the most money, but I just go back in my mind, I say, well, should I have made the decision to make more money? I probably, in my more economic sense, yes. But I think in my emotional self, I did the right thing, and I guess I did the right thing. I'm not ashamed of that at all. You would probably advance into the more remunerative aspects of it.
Well, emotion trumps logic almost every single time.
Really, who taught you that?
I don't know.
I think it was your girlfriend.
I either read it in a book or listened to an audio book or a podcast,
She's
something like
that.
But yeah, emotion. I mean, that's why they always say if you are trying to sell a product, don't just try to sell a product. I mean, why does somebody want this product that you have? How is it going to make their life better? How is it going to benefit them? And if you're able to get them to look at it at an emotional point and not you just trying to sell them, because of course nobody likes to be sold. But yeah, so if you're able to get, like, if you just say, I have this dog food and it's great and you should buy it for your dog, they're not going to be interested in it. But if you say, since the 1970s, the life expectancy of our dogs has dropped 7 years. So by simply substituting 1/3 of your dog's diet with more raw, biologically appropriate food, then you'll have a longer, happier life with your dog. Your dog will be healthier. You'll have less health issues. And then, how much more time, how much is 7 more years worth with your dog.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So something like that instead of just by getting that emotional state. How did we lead into that? You said something about emotion. Oh yeah, what you did.
You said
made
emotionality trumps rationality.
yes, and you
like
said you made an emotional decision when you were younger to do something that you would rather prefer instead of the one that could have been more beneficial financially.
Right.
But you've done pretty good for yourself, though. I mean, it's not like that destroyed your opportunity to grow your successful company.
The company could have grown more. It could have gotten more involved in certain aspects of real estate that would have probably generated a better bottom line. But I'm happy with what I do. I mean, I live in this one-bedroom house that you're in right now, and for me, it's quite satisfactory, and I don't care to necessarily. I'm not disposed to advance my career or my possessions because of some image that's imposed on me by what people expect me to do and live and to own.
It is a beautiful location, though. I mean, Santa Monica is amazing. I love Santa Monica. What about hobbies? I know you have a few hobbies that you enjoy doing on a regular basis, and one of them is reading. I know you're a big reader and you're a huge history buff, right?
I would say that's correct, yeah.
Are there certain things that you have maybe learned from reading about history or reading about different things that helped you out while you were getting your business started?
I don't think, it's funny, I don't usually read history in order to enhance my business career, except that, number one, don't give up the fight, especially when it's the darkest.
Well, that's
you
what I
know
mean.
that too, don't you? I'm sure.
Well, and the reason why I said that is it's easy to say I read a business book to learn how to grow my business.
Yeah, no, I don't do that.
Right? But sometimes we can find the most valuable information in the most unlikely sources.
Yeah.
So by reading something just like you said, don't give up the fight. Maybe somebody, let's say William Wallace. I love that movie Braveheart and William Wallace and his whole story, right? Not giving up. So just like you said, perseverance, kind of pushing through those obstacles and continuing the fight. That's why I said most unlikely places.
Right. Well, I'm doing reading right now, and also there's a TV series on the Medici, which is the banking family that really began in many ways the Renaissance in Florence. And Florence is the beginning of the Renaissance in general. And they went through some tough times, but it took Lorenzo, for example, Lorenzo Medici, going through horrendous difficulty, but still going through and creating negotiations that eventually let him advance not only his family's fortune but also the fortune of that city. That to me, those are kinds of stories I like.
What's your favorite history story?
I think it was the story of Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. The address was penned, as we all know, on a napkin, some small piece of paper, as Lincoln was traveling from Washington to the Gettysburg battlefield to give an address, which was secondary. He wasn't the primary speaker. I think the primary speaker was Stanton, maybe the secretary. I can't remember what Stanton did. Maybe the Secretary of War or something at the time. And so Stanton's address lasted for an hour and a half. Can you believe that? I could never give a speech. We want to give a speech that long. Nor would you want to listen to a speech that long.
I mean, I could teach something in an hour and a half, but a speech that lasts an hour and a half, I don't know about that.
For some reason, I mean, the English language at the time was very effusive, very, very, explosive. Not explosive, but I mean, long Latinate words and sentence structure that went on forever. And Lincoln got up there, and his address was, I think, all of 4.5 minutes, which to me, in that 4.5 minutes, epitomized not only, who we were and what we were as a nation, what we went through, and how we're going to survive. And I think that no one really thought much of that until, upon reflection, they realized really quickly after, this was a phenomenal and very important address to the nation as a whole. So, I mean, I love that story. If I can talk or speak or write, I would love to be have the command of the language and metaphor that Abraham Lincoln did. That's just one. There are many historic stories I will talk about.
I think you're capable of doing that. And history, Operation Iraqi Freedom 1. We invaded and we moved into Iraq.
You're right.
Afterwards,
This is
I did
2006? What year was this?
2003 was when we did the initial invasion, right?
Are you that
And
old?
it continued to go for...
Are you that old?
I'm getting older. Well, so Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 and 2. I was in both of those, and when I came back, we were hanging out, and you said that you would like to sit down and talk a little bit about the operations, different missions that we had when we were out there in country for a certain specific reason. What was that reason?
Well, it goes back, I think, to well, if you really want to know the truth, I always felt guilty about never serving in Vietnam because I was 4F.
No. What it was...
I know what you're getting at. I mean, I think that was a subconscious, in many ways, it was my subconscious reason. I mean, I thought at the time I would write a book that would, that would talk about not only war, but from the point of view of a very specific, persona in the war, fighting the war, who would fall in love in country with an Iraqi. Well,
you started writing the book, right?
Well, I took notes. I did take notes. Yeah, this is a long time ago. Yeah, and but I had no idea how to write it, and so that's when you and I started talking about that. But by the time, I just never had the time to really work out the details, and by that time, there were a number of other books written about it that kind of involved the same storyline.
That's okay, though. I mean, when Quest Nutrition decided to start their protein bars, people told them, hey, there's plenty of protein bars out there. You don't need to start one.
Well, you're right. You're right about that. You are right about that.
And they started one anyways, and it quickly became a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
But if the main reason which I love about the idea of the book that you need to finish, so the listeners can download it.
No. Well, it's only in note fashion right now. Go ahead. Sorry.
But it's bringing the human element into these great conflicts. Taking that human element and taking somebody from both opposing side, which should be enemies, even though they're not. And that's something we talked about before, where not on this podcast, but just you and I hanging out talking. How is it that we can end up going into a position in a different country and fighting against somebody we never met? If you look at it on a personal level, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Because had we met these individuals maybe in a different location, if they were born in a different spot and they were raised in a different culture, it's quite possible that they could be your buddy that you're going and hanging out with.
Well, I don't mean to always refer to the Vietnamese War, because quite frankly, I kind of had forgotten about it. I didn't think we'd ever get into a situation like that again, that our collective memory is so strong on that it's not going to happen again. Well, guess what? It did happen again, and you were involved in it. But Ken Burns, the documentarian, did a great series on the Vietnam War, and it ends with the veterans of that war who had their buddies shot, killed, maimed, companies ruined, civilians killed by Americans and vice versa, going back to Vietnam and meeting up with members of the enemy, ex-Viet Cong fighters, ex-members of the North Vietnamese Army, because the two were acting together. And they realized that's exactly what you said. We are really of the same species. And why are we fighting? And when you meet and look someone eye to eye, and there isn't the required impulse of shooting or knifing or bayoneting, you realize that they are your brothers, whether they're your Marine brothers or whether you're brothers across the trench. And you're absolutely right about that.
And that's why I love the idea of your book, though.
Oh, okay.
Because it was going to be that, whether it was a Marine or a soldier or somebody, but somebody who was overseas and ended up meeting that Iraqi woman and building a relationship and seeing where that might go. I mean, I don't know. You're the one writing it.
Right. Well, if I can retire from this business, maybe I'll have the time to do that.
You definitely should, because I know a lot of people would like to listen to it, or not listen to it, read it, unless they listen to audiobooks, because I listen to audiobooks all the time. Great way to get your information, guys, audible.com. And that's not a plug, because they're not paying me. But it is a great website. Do you use Audible?
I don't listen too much. I mean, I like reading it, because I think reading, I like to see the words, because the words are what makes literature important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the words and the wordplay and the poetry and the metaphor behind the words is important, just as important as a visualization that would be occurring in, let's say, a movie or a video.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just my own. The audio can be just as good. I mean, before there was a written word, there was a spoken word.
That's right.
Right, and Homer and all the great tales of our ancient world from 10,000 years ago were all spoken. And we had the memory, I don't know how they did it, but people had the memory capacity of memorizing all of the Iliad and all the Odyssey and simply spoke it as they went around as bards to these, whatever thing they were going to.
Well, that's what I love though about Audible is if you're driving, if you have a long commute, the sanctuary that I stay at, Camis and Canines Sanctuary, it's about a 35-minute drive if I want to get into
Are you
town.
plugging canines that came up?
Camis and Canines, nonprofit organization, of course. Focuses on helping transitioning veterans, rescuing dogs, pairing the two together, transforming two lives at once. But anyways, it's a long drive from that location, and so I'm always either listening to an audiobook or I'm listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what inspired me to want to start my own podcast. And what I like so much about the podcast platform, though, a little bit more than some of the audiobooks, because I can't continuously do audiobooks. And the reason why is quite often they'll hire somebody to read the book for them, so it's not the author. And you can sense that there's not as much passion in it from the person that's simply reading it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you get a book that is actually written by the author, for example, one that I listened to a little while back, Extreme Ownership, from the Navy SEAL Jocko, was phenomenal because him and his brother-in-arms who he wrote the book with read the book. So they actually put their emotions into it and they care about the story that they're telling. And it's not just, it wouldn't surprise me though if they paid somebody to read it, they listened to it and they didn't like it. And so they did it themselves.
So interesting.
It's possible. I hired when I was over at the Tom Rose School, the School for Professional Dog Trainers, I was one of the instructors as well as the marketing director, and we put together a promotional video, and I hired 2 different people to do the voiceover. I sent them the script, I paid them to do it, and both of them, when I linked it up back with the video, it did not work because they weren't dog trainers. So the emotion wasn't behind it, and I ended up doing the voiceover myself because I could get that feeling that somebody who wants to aspire to be a dog trainer when they're listening to it. The other one, I even tried sending them examples and stuff, so I could see how something like that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
But those books, and like I said, the just listening, and what I like so much about listening to podcasts is because it's a conversation, and you almost sit down, you almost feel as if you're sitting down in the conversation with them, and you're part of it, or you're an observer, and it's way more interesting that way instead of somebody just reading something.
Well, certainly when it's dialogue, like what you and I are doing right now, there's more involvement, and I think any third party could jump in right now and start making comments. And that's great, and they should. Whoever listens to this, by the way, make a comment.
Yeah, comment below. Let us know what you think about the episode. So as we're finishing up the episode, what books would you recommend to people that could provide value for them, whether they're wanting to start a business, whether they want to learn more about history, what's your favorite book, or if they are interested in learning more about real estate or the history of it, or maybe some of the great architects that designed homes such as this one?
Well, there's so many books out there. Let's start with the last question and we'll go backwards to forwards. I think one of the most influential books that actually got me started in this whole venture of architectural real estate was, I was traveling in Europe. I was a kid, so I was like maybe 20 or 21. And I went to a bookstore in Athens, Greece, of all places.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And I found this book about my homeland. It's called 5 California Architects by Esther McCoy. So at the time, this would have been maybe shortly after it was published. But I read that book, and when I got home, I reread it again. And it talked about the important architectural and cultural history of Los Angeles, which, having gone to school in the East, seemed to be forgotten and demeaned by all the Eastern snobs who thought, they had no culture. Even though we had, the cultural epitome of what our country has to offer, namely movies and films, noir films and Chandler, all of that happened here in LA. So I used this book to almost research, every property that was involved in this and say, these properties come on the market, I'm the guy who is going to represent them. In terms of, so that's what real estate. In terms of business, as I said, I don't really read a lot of business books.
Learn by doing.
Yeah. The Art of War, I would say, probably is an important book to read, whether you're involved in business or the Marines, but I think you know about that. And some of the more important books go way back. I think Plato was incredibly influential for me. who in the book to read was probably The Republic, which has a number of dialogues which everybody is familiar with, but it's interesting to actually read them and see how applicable it is to truth, which seems to be sullied today to the point where it may not exist in the next generation.
Have you read Radical Honesty?
No.
Speaking of truth, that's a good one. Radical honesty. Probably one of the more challenging things to do is to be radically honest with everybody.
Yeah, it's hard for me.
It's super hard. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
even it was interesting in the book. The author talks about it's not just saying what is truthful, but also not withholding information.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most common way people will lie to one another is by withholding information. And by
Right.
withholding information, you put yourself in a bad position, by not being honest up front,
Right.
Quake book. Have you ever heard of that term?
A Quake book,
Have you heard of a quake book?
a book that shakes your innards to the point where you get to make a change. And
Where it changes your life, yeah.
yeah, sure. I mean, I haven't heard. I mean, it's a good term. I hadn't heard that term until just now.
Do you have a quake book?
There's one right here. If I could probably get for you. Well, this is one of the books written by Noah Harari, but he wrote *Sapiens*, which a lot of people have heard.
Oh, *Sapiens*. Yep, I actually.
Did you read it?
No, I didn't read *Sapiens*, but I
Yeah.
started listening to the audiobook *Sapiens*.
Did you? What do you think?
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, and the Neanderthals, they believe there still are some DNA from the Neanderthals that exist today.
Well, yeah. I mean, each one of us has a certain percentage, up
Correct.
to 3% of Neanderthal DNA in us. So
Mm-hmm.
it clearly indicates that they were as widespread as Homo sapiens, and that there was a lot of intermarriage.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you brought over a book. Which one is this?
This is Homo Deus, which is written, I think, not shortly, but it was the second book to *Sapiens*, again written by Noah Harari, who was an anthropologist, economist, everything, universal author, or an author of universal knowledge.
So it's a brief history of tomorrow. Was it as good as *Sapiens*? Did you read *Sapiens*?
Yes, I did.
So which one do you like more?
Well, I'm just reading this now, and I mean, *Sapiens* I probably liked that more, but I don't know how it's going to end up.
Oh, okay. How
Yeah.
far into this one are you?
Okay. Maybe third way through. You see-
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you got a good idea of where it's going to be taking you. Quick book for me. Let's see. Have you read the book *Letting Go*?
No.
That's a really good one. I mean, it's more about reaching a higher level of consciousness, and understanding. A lot of times what we were talking about before, letting our emotions control us. And letting go is this concept of figuring out what it is that's making you feel a certain way, letting go of those emotions and not letting that build up and adding stress on your life. Something as simple as, and this is a more smaller example, but it goes into great depth and there's a whole lot to it. But, having somebody cut you off in traffic. Often people get really mad and upset about it, but it's not personal. The person doesn't know you, and they're going to cut somebody else off in the future. And if you're not there to see it, are you going to get upset about that one? No, because it's not you. But for some reason,
Right.
when they cut you off, you get mad because you're driving. And of course, if it's close to almost putting you into an accident, right, then you could be a little bit upset. But it's being able to let go of those feelings, and you end up being a happier person because of it. And people start to notice the difference around you because you're more happy and positive. But it was a great book. And speaking of the whole car thing, I've heard different theories on why people get so upset when they're driving in a car. One I heard was that you're at a heightened state. You're at a more heightened state as you're driving. But I don't know if I agree with that completely because people become very relaxed. They do it so much and they become relaxed with it. It's no different than when I was overseas in Iraq and I'm carrying around my rifle 24/7 every single day. It was just something that I had to carry around. That's what it felt like. But when I was first handed my rifle at Recruit Training Depot in San Diego and they first gave you that rifle, it's like this powerful tool that was just placed in your hands. But by holding it for so long, eventually it just becomes annoying because it's an extra 6.6 pounds or whatever the weight is, I don't remember, that you're carrying around, right? It changes your outlook. So another theory that I heard, and I think this one might be a little bit more accurate, is it triggers the primitive part of your brain where people are moving in on your territory because your vehicle becomes a part of your territory. You've heard this?
No, but I agree with that. I mean, not only do I agree with that, I think that because we are verging into more or less a subconscious effort to manipulate the drive. Whenever anybody cuts in front of you, all of a sudden now they've interrupted that, subconscious, and it raises to a conscious level that, you're regretting and resenting at the same time.
And that's something that may change here in the near future as we have self-driving cars.
Well, exactly. That's why whenever I take Uber, usually I sit in the front, but even when I sit in the front, I will, just to ease my blood pressure, which just seems to be okay, but maybe it's because I do breathing exercises. You take really deep breaths, and then you let it go. And I do that sometimes throughout the entire ride, and it's such a beautiful experience. It transforms that experience into not, quite the opposite of what you would normally do if you're driving behind a wheel.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you familiar with the trolley question?
What's a trolley question?
It's a philosophical question or a moral issue where it's been told for a long time. You're in a trolley and you have the ability to change tracks if you need to.
Yeah.
And there are 5 workers on the track that you are currently on. Yeah. And if you pull the lever, it'll change it to the other track, saving the 5. But there's one individual on the other track.
Yeah.
So you'll basically sacrifice the 1 to save the 5. You're familiar with this, right?
Yes.
Now, this is one point in history, though, where the trolley equation actually comes to life. And that's with self-driving cars, right? Because if these self-driving cars are programmed to get to one destination to the next and to do it safely, all the different car companies can communicate with one another,
right.
And they can say this is the rule.
How do they answer that dilemma?
Right, well, they can answer how it is with the vehicles that are on the road, right? But the issue is, in order for it to be a perfect system, there would have to be no other cars, meaning where you drive it yourself, not self-driving, and it has to also consider natural disasters. That has to be somehow programmed into it. What does it do if...
What does it do if an earthquake breaks a bridge in half?
Yeah, or if, it's really slick on the road and one of the cars starts to slide and it's going to get into an accident.
What does it do when snow covers all the markers on the road?
Or what does it do if a child jumps in front of the car? Right? Does the car at that point, let's say it's driving in a narrow road and there's buildings on each side and a kid runs out in front of the car, is the car programmed to save the child by sacrificing itself and the person in the vehicle? Or is it programmed to not?
No, these are all moral questions that the algorithm has to solve. Somehow, it's not the algorithm; it's the humans behind the algorithm.
Mm-hmm. But then, how would you be able to sell it too? If there's a vehicle that's willing to sacrifice the passengers, right? I don't want to buy a vehicle that's willing to sacrifice the passengers, but at the same time, you also don't want a vehicle that's willing to just run over something that's in the road. Yeah,
that's right. Well, you know what? I don't think that the manufacturer or the dealership would emphasize either one. Hey, buy me because I'll save the child.
Right. Yeah, it's not going to be something.
So I think, those are really great questions that the next generation, maybe your generation, not mine, would have to answer.
Yeah,
that's an escape. I shouldn't. No. That is. I'm still part of the living world. I should be part of that answer too.
Absolutely, and it is happening right now. I mean, they think we're going to have fully self-running cars by what, 2022? I think.
They're already happening in Phoenix, Scottsdale.
They're developing it for sure.
No, but they're on the road.
Oh, they are like completely self-driving.
Yeah, I think Uber even is using them. They've been in and around Scottsdale and Phoenix. Then in Pittsburgh, they're being used. I don't know if the cars have a human driver at the wheel or next to the wheel. I don't know, but they are in use. Do
you think you'll be able to buy normal vehicles anymore at some point, or do you think those will be completely obsolete? I think
to make it truly safe, to overcome the problems and even the moral dilemmas you spoke of, I think human drivers are the problem, not the machine.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't
it? It is. And those will go away. And if you think about it, that definitely, well, maybe the only type that would still be driven by the human would maybe be law enforcement or things of that nature, where they have to be able to, those might be programmed as well. But when I thought about this, I started to hear about this happening. I started to think about so many different things that would instantly go away. Of course, the obvious is truck drivers, right? That's going to no longer be a job.
That's probably one of the first.
Probably one of the first ones to go. But then also, think about criminals, for example. The getaway driver. You no longer have a getaway driver, right? If you can't They can't. It's so many different things. The way police will deal with situations is going to be different. The fire department's going to be different.
So all the crimes will be committed by historic car drivers.
Right.
Driving those old vehicles around, and of course
But those can probably be spotted too.
they can. There's a movie called Driver, which is about a driver who does that, who drives only for criminals.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with that movie.
Yeah. Or there are crazy people who like to drive, fast cars or sports cars. They may want to continue driving that car because of the thrill. So I think there will always be a certain part of our population that wants to drive.
There is a website. I'm not sure what the website is. I heard it when I was listening to a different podcast, and it's somebody who's a huge car advocate, and they have created a website, something to the extent of SaveTheDriver.com or something, or Fight to Drive or something like that, for people that are already starting a movement to keep human drivers, because of those people that like to be behind the wheel, that like to invest their time into.
So they can go to a track.
They can go to a track, yeah. That'll probably become something that will be more popular. People will pay to go drive cars.
Yeah.
And then would you have to have a license at that point? Is there going to be, will kids still get licensed when they're going through school?
In order to make use of automatic driving cars? I don't think so. If you want to drive on a track, you have to have a license.
Right.
Yeah.
But that'll probably go away as being a normal course in high school for students.
Yeah, well, it should be. I never took driver's ed.
You didn't?
No, they didn't offer it in my high school. It was not considered to be an academic subject for some reason.
No kidding.
Oh, no.
I mean, I'm sure that's still pretty... think about 15 years ago. If you were to tell somebody that in 15 years, parents would rather pay somebody to drive their kids everywhere, that's someone they don't know, than to give their kids a license and a vehicle, you'd say you're crazy.
Yeah.
But now there's parents that would rather just have their kids like, here's your card that you used strictly, or they program their card into their child's or their teenager, whatever, their app.
Well, yeah.
So then they're getting charged when they drive around, but that's much safer. Nobody would have even thought about that before.
One of the when computers became more common, must have been in the late 80s, early 90s. I moved to Santa Monica, and traffic wasn't nearly as bad, but it began to obviously there were problems getting across this big town of ours. And I thought, well, why not use the computer to put drivers in touch who are going to a certain place in touch with other users who need to get there, and they can share the drive, and they'll be called ride sharing. Mm-hmm. So I took that to some investors and some banks, just friends of mine. And you know what? It's not that they didn't believe in the technology. They said, this will never work because no one's going to get into a car with a stranger at the wheel. And now that was only like 20 years ago. Not yet. Crazy.
I think it's actually more of a risk for the drivers.
Oh, yeah. Talk to some Uber drivers and they'll tell you what they have to go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my buddies drives for all of them. All the different platforms. There's a new platform out there that I guess the driver's own. I don't even know what it's called.
Yeah.
But what do you see? What are your predictions for the future as far as how technology, based on what we're already seeing, right? The developing just like self-driving cars. How is that going to change the future? What are your predictions?
Are you talking about cars in particular? Well, I think
no, any sort of technology.
Well, I think just that alone will change the way cities can develop and look. I don't think we'll need garages. As much as what are we going to do with all the parking garages that we have, especially in downtown LA? That has to be. And I think we got to start changing our laws right now, zoning laws and land use laws, to look seriously at that and how that's going to change. I think that going back to Facebook and Google, how do we establish norms that or criteria for judging the truth or falseness of a proposition that may occur on those platforms? That to me is a big problem, and I think there are a lot of ways to solve that, but that would be a discussion for another time.
It is challenging, though. That's a good point. I mean, even certain platforms that try to help solve that problem, they still fail. Something as simple as Yelp, or these different review platforms. Because what do a lot of people do? They'll write fake reviews.
That's right.
But then they will
hire people to chime in,
or they'll try to attempt to
undercut.
Or Yelp will try to attempt to eliminate the fake reviews, but then in the process they end up removing real reviews,
Right.
and then they make business owners upset about that,
Right.
and dealing with all these issues. But there's constantly ways where they're trying to do that, but a lot of bad things can come from it as well. If somebody maybe just has, and this is, I find it really interesting with technology finding or developing to highlight those that are good and to block those that are not. But how is it able to determine that, and where can some of these issues or issues that we may run into from faults in the system and the human programming as well?
Right. I think there are ways of doing that, but I don't want to get into it right now because that sun's beating down on us.
All right. Well, believe it or not, Mike, that is the end of our episode. I want to thank you for taking the time to let me come out, hang out with you, talk like we always do, but share with our listeners.
You know what? It really was a conversation. It wasn't really an interview, and I should thank you.
And that's the best way to do it. So thanks again. Thanks for listening, everybody. We love you, and we will see you on the next episode. That's it.